All right, so it's about 10:05. We're just going to get started. My name is Sarah Sager, and I have the great pleasure of introducing Joe, who is one of my favorite people here on campus and one of my favorite places on campus. As you know, he's in the Knowledge Commons, and the amazing things about Joe are the fact of his demeanor that has coupled so well in this role of being a steward of the Knowledge Commons. So he's going to explain to you what the Knowledge Commons are. As most of you probably know, he is a librarian. Most of you have probably seen where his office is in there, right? Other than you, sorry. But you know him before.
I promise I'll come see you.
Okay.
I know how to find it.
But the many interesting things that he's going to share with us are probably not going to touch on the fact that he is why this space is so amazing. Because of the way that he manages it, the way that he oversees it, he's embedded within it. He definitely takes on a role of mentoring the people that he's working with, of interacting with the people who come in and out of the Knowledge Commons there. It's just, I'm hoping that he touches on all of the cool things that he does in there, but we'll let him get started.
Sarah, thank you. So this is such a small enough group that let's kind of quickly just introduce ourselves to make sure that I cover things that are going to be relevant to you and also kind of get a sense as to what you know about the Knowledge Commons. So.
I'm Barb Smith. I actually work in Education Technology Services. And
Oh.
Media Commons is part of that.
Yes.
But I never get out of my office.
Okay.
I'd love to know what we're doing.
Okay, Barb. Okay.
Carolyn Jensen, I'm the director of the College of Science Advising Center, and at some point we're going to actually renovate a building and install a learning center in the basement. So I figured I just visited the Krause
Innovation Studio.
and
Right.
I just wanted to learn a little bit more, and I need to come visit you. We can go together.
Hey, Mike.
Mike Evans from Worthington Scranton. I'm the Assistant Chief Academic Officer and a nursing instructor. Also a doctoral student in the College of Nursing. So I'm interested in learning more about this and how it could be useful to me and my students.
Okay.
I'm Victoria Raish. I'm a PhD student in Learning Design and Technology. I work in the basement library right now for my assistantship
Oh, okay.
with Emily Brimlin.
Okay.
But I'm just more interested in environments and spaces for learning.
Uh-huh.
Hi, my name is Nicole Choi. I'm a second-year PhD in second knowledge program. My research interest is in learning space and listening to student learning.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline. I'm also a PhD in Learning Design and Technology. And I love the plant ball. I really love it, and whenever I walk past, I'm like, okay,
That's nice. Yeah.
I'm John Ho. I'm a campus technology officer from Harrisburg campus.
Okay.
And we've actually copied quite a few things that you've done, with the exception of the living wall.
Oh, okay.
Get with it.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Well, I'm glad to do that and have a small group, and hopefully we'll give you enough time for us to have some questions from you. I'm going to hit you with a lot of numbers this morning, though. But I'm going to group these around three things. Since I've been at the Knowledge Commons in charge of it for the last 2 years, it was opened in January 2012, and I was hired shortly before that to come and manage this space. And ever since I've been there, I've been looking at how do we determine how successful is this new venture, because it's an incredible investment for the library to put money into this, and they want to know, was it a successful venture for us? The other thing about it is I think it goes back to what Chris Long said this morning in his introductions remark, was that technology is changing the way we teach and the way education works. And this is very true with the Knowledge Commons. So how the library operates has really been transformed and has been changed with technology and with the spaces that we're trying to create for students. So I get a lot of data, but I'm going to concentrate on data that I collect in 3 areas: computers, group study rooms, and services. And this is the only slide that is going to be reminiscent of this morning's presentation in its simplicity. So I just forewarn you that there is going to be a number of things that I'll be showing that has a lot of numbers, but don't worry too much about that, and I'll just kind of emphasize the key points. First off, need to get an understanding, and I wasn't for sure who was going to be here, as far as what is the Knowledge Commons, okay? And I'm going to take advantage of Sarah, since she is frequently in the Knowledge Commons. This is a map, floor plan of the first floor of the T Library. Just point out to people where the Knowledge Commons is, if you get a handle.
Kind of a little stressful, but I believe, and I could be totally wrong, that it's
Okay. And that is the most common way of people thinking of it. That when they hear the Knowledge Commons, they think of this as the Petit Library, this is the first floor of the Petit Library, and they think of it as being the West End. Okay?
I failed that test, I'm seeing. I said I failed that test.
Technically, and based on our donors, the Tombros McWhorter Knowledge Commons actually is this whole first floor. It starts over at the east entrance, at the Curtin Road entrance, and it goes all the way across. And if you ever want to do a scavenger hunt on this campus, try to find the McWhorter Tombros Knowledge Commons, because we have 2 major donors, 2 major families, and in one entrances we have the Tombros McWhorter Knowledge Commons, and other entrances we have the McWhorter Tombros Knowledge Commons. So a little trivia. This morning, when I talk about the Knowledge Commons, I'm going to talk about what is most common, okay? So I'm going to talk about really this area right here, and my office is right in the middle of it. So this is the area that I oversee, and I see directly everything, the activities going on every day in that space, but I have responsibility over the whole first floor. So, and we have different names for different areas on the first floor, okay? So just to try to keep it simple, when I talk about the Knowledge Commons specifically, I'll be talking about the West End. If I talk about the whole floor, it's the first floor of the library, okay? So one of the main things that I get, and I get this almost every month, is I get a computer use report. And the computer use report tells me what the computers are being used here and at Franklin Atrium and Leisure. There's 172 computers on the first floor. And I know from those computer use reports that on the first floor, that on average, out of those 172 computers, they get used about 1,169 times. In other words, every hour that we're open 24 hours a day, somebody is sitting down at a computer every 2 hours. Okay, so that's a simple way of thinking it. Somebody is sitting down at a computer to start a new session every 2 hours if we average that out for all 172 computers on campus. What I find interesting, and because I look at a lot of numbers, is how computers are used differently across the floor, okay? So when Mike first knew that I was taking this position, conversation he probably won't remember, but when he heard that my title is the head of the Knowledge Commons, he asked, and if you know Mike, this would make sense, he asked, so are you head of common knowledge? And a lot of the things I hope I say to this morning are going to be, oh, that makes sense, that's just common knowledge, okay? So the computers that get a lot of sessions are heavily used, and there's a lot of turnover. So computers that are near the entrances of the library, of the Knowledge Commons, get heavily used. So at Franklin Atrium, is right outside of Curtin Road entrance. They're right there. There's 8 of them. They're on podiums. You go in, check your email, and you're off. A lot of activity. Okay, so it just moves constantly. Okay, whereas the classroom, if you know the classroom in this space, is furthest away and most remote. So if you're looking for a computer in the library and you can't find any in this front half, if you go to the very back, you're going to find usually something available. Okay, so they don't get used as much. The other thing that I look at is, so how is the Knowledge Commons compared to other places in the library? So we have, I think it's 45% of all the computers in the library are on that first floor, those 172, okay? And no, we have a third of all the computers that are in the library are on the first floor, okay? But they get used about half the total amount of time throughout the whole library. So the heaviest, most trafficked area of the library on the first floor is where students are using computers, okay? Again, common knowledge. It's not, anything really major. What's interesting to me is when I look at how the library is doing compared to other major computer labs on campus. So those of you who know the university, these are the top 5 computer labs. These are the largest computer labs on campus, including just the first floor of the library. And then most of these other buildings are associated with dorms or residential housing. So you got east, west, north, central, all covered in this slide, okay? And when I look at what happened last semester, one of the things that's interesting is that the library is getting actually more use, seeing more students coming through it, sitting down at the computers, than any computer lab on campus. A lot more use. And that really surprised me, because when I talk to the kids who work in the library, but who also rotate between us and Pollock and Russ and Raring, they tell me that they seem really busy. They seem always to be the busier. But it's actually, in looking at just the numbers, except for midnight to 1 and 1 to 2, Pollock gets the most use on campus, midnight and at 1, in the 24-hour that we're all open. All these labs are open 24 hours a day. So it gets a lot of use. So heavy use on the first floor, heavy use on the campus. And again, I apologize for all the data thrown at you. But one of the other things I look at is, so we know we get a lot of traffic, but does that traffic vary depending on where you are in the library? Okay. And what I found is, that I was showing you up in Franklin Atrium at the entrance, that you had almost 4,000 logins per computer last semester. They only get 8 minutes use. The turnaround is really fast. They're near the entrance. And what students are doing is they're just checking email, they're checking their schedules, they're willing to print out a paper. They're at stand-up stations. They don't even have a chair. So heavy use, very short period of time on them. And then you work your way across, and the Knowledge Commons gets 93 minutes. Gets almost an hour and a half average when you're sitting there. So those of you who know the Knowledge Commons knows that what students will say is they really like the large work surfaces. They like their large monitors. There's places to spread things out. We have no restrictions on food or drink. So all of the comments, when I was looking at how much time people were spending on things, and when I talked to them about it, what I find is that if you make the setting exciting or inviting and warm, you're going to have students spending more time there. Okay? And in fact, when they designed the Knowledge Commons, one of the things they had considered was make it more a traditional computer lab of just rows and rows and rows and computers, because we could get, instead of the 60 machines that we have, we could have actually gotten 100 in that space if it was more designed more like a traditional lab. Okay, But instead, we decided that it was really important for students to be able to spread things out. And as a result, we benefit from it because the longer students are in the library, the longer they're in the Knowledge Commons is a good thing. Okay, we want that. Yeah.
How do you keep it clean? I mean, that's a pragmatic point of view, and this is something we talk about for our space.
Right, right. Surprisingly, I've never had an issue. 2 years, I haven't had any major spills, and I have food brought in all the time, and that means pizzas, that means chicken wings, that means greasy food, it means Chinese carryout, and it hasn't been a problem.
Do the students really clean up after themselves? I mean, this is
No,
kind of
no,
really question.
we have trash containers. I think that one of the things that makes a difference in our space is I'm just there.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm right in the middle in a glass booth looking around me all the time, and I will get up and I do point out, you're leaving, you clean it up after, you take it with you. So we do try the Boy Scout rule of, isn't it Boy Scouts? Or no, the national parks. You bring it in, you take it out. So yeah.
And they also provide wipes for surfaces.
I feel like they have
Yeah. The comment was that she's sometimes greasy on the keyboard, but and students don't tend to complain, but there is something, and one of the things that I think would be interesting to look at down the road in future research is does this notion that I'm going into the library affect the way I behave? Okay? Because that's different, I think, than going into Pollock or going into Waring. Okay? Because when I'm going into the library, and I can tell you, we can be filled, and to the most part during the day is fairly quiet. And that has always surprised me because we don't say you have to keep your voices down. We don't say you can't have food or drink. And we haven't had a problem.
We've actually run into that. It's a problem for us on the first floor. We try to really want the students to talk. And the collaborative areas, and it's a challenge because I think just culturally, they're so used to the library as the place where you're quiet. And we also have the same as you do. We have adult presence around them. And I think that just helps with the policing of the area. That's not as messy. And like Pollock is great. It's much more of a Wild West there. But even they've adopted some of your furniture styles and things. They've tried to increase the square footage of the students to write on. They've redesigned. We've got almost as many bodies in there, but the desks are much nicer now. It's not the butts in the row anymore.
Yeah, it is much. Yeah, the renovations they did last year were really nice. Yeah.
I agree. Particularly an adult male presence in an area helps.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to make an argument with adult female to hold it.
But it goes back to the old, the gym teacher in the hallway syndrome, that it's just having someone there helps.
Right. The interesting thing, too, since the beginning of the year, I started also getting wireless use reports. And I think that it's important in looking at a space like this that is so heavily dependent on desktops that we also start looking at what's happening with wireless use and how are students using that. Okay, so I don't have a whole lot of back data, but for this year so far, you can see that they're doing 10 times the number of devices that are using compared to the desktop computer. We're getting 10 times the number of devices on wireless. The total amount of time is twice the amount of time on average that you get for a device. The average minutes, however, is considerably less. Until you look at what they're using. And then when you look at what they're using, you have the heavy laptop users. Okay? So on the whole first floor, the average use on a desktop is 52 minutes, but on the laptops is 47 minutes. So the laptops are really kind of moving into the space. A lot of students. And what's interesting is that a lot of times that larger surface area, if you walk through the space, you oftentimes will see somebody sitting down with a laptop and working on the desktop, and they may be having two course-related things going on at the same time. Have you done that? I mean, have you had multi-machine goings on at the same time? It's a very common thing among students to have a lot of different devices going on simultaneously. So seeing 10 times the number of devices using the wireless is no surprise to anyone. It's common knowledge. I mean, yeah.
So do you have laptops there for them that they check out?
Yeah. But interesting in looking at, later on there's a slide that'll show this, but looking at what people are borrowing from the library, the laptops use is decreasing. So everybody's bringing their own. Everybody has their own. And we also have lockers in the space that students can lock them up or they can recharge them from, so that if you're in there and you're working at a desktop but you don't want your laptop with you, you can go and secure it so you don't have to worry about it. And those are, in fact, I have to look at how we can expand those. So the common knowledge from this first part, heavy use on the first floor. First floor computers use is heavier than anywhere else on campus, at least from the fall 2013 data. The computers near your exits are going to be heavier used, so near the entrances, having computers, the stand-up stations have worked really well as far as just come in, check that email, check something, and on. So it's always nice to have some of those that students aren't going to spend much time on. Okay, but they will spend more time in the KC, larger work surfaces, bigger screens, food and drink, more comfortable. And I think the thing that I want to kind of monitor is this heavy use of laptops, and because there's always the debate, when do we replace our computer labs with just having the surfaces for students to use their desktop?
Do you have, in addition to do you have plugins for their laptops at the stations?
Yeah.
I mean,
So
I'm thinking of I just went to the other knowledge conference in education, and they basically just have the stations where you can plug in.
The pucks.
Yeah, exactly.
So they have the pucks, and Joe has the pucks in the individual rooms. So there's two separate areas that he's talking about. So both the stationary spaces that there's desktops and the outline rooms like the 126 that have the pucks.
The group study rooms, yeah. But you'll have a lot of. One of the consideration in the selection of furniture for this space was can it easily put electrical outlets on it somehow? So every one of those large surfaces has 4 electrical outlets in it. Every one of the rooms that Sarah was talking about, in where those pucks are, there's electrical outlets in there. Okay, every coffee table has electric outlet. Every new bookcase has a row of electrical outlets along them. So every place that they could add a way to connect,
But I think what she's talking about is Krause Innovation. Krause is only
laptops only.
well that they bring in.
Yeah.
So it's only projection.
Right.
Where that's the difference between the Knowledge Commons and Krause. Where Knowledge Commons has desktops and projectable rooms. So there's no desktops in those rooms.
Right.
They just have.
But the big difference is you're not allowed to do cross.
That is another huge difference.
You're not allowed to have any kind of food like step water and cross.
Right.
And that's it's a fairly big problem.
Well, they police it.
Yeah, you get your food taken.
There's not.
Well, that's what and again, I don't mean to that's what I'm trying to find out is when we come up with this thing that we want for 24 hours, and God willing it'll happen sooner rather than later. I keep saying, but we're going to renovate the whole east wing of Rittenhour, make it into a student center with the basement being basically kind of a knowledge commons. And so I'm picking your brains, I'm sorry. And I know they do really cool things down in Harrisburg because I tried to steal some ideas about when you were renovating labs, how they set up those things. Yeah, and that was the other thing I was going to ask you. Do you set up an individual charging station or just provide them with chargers? Because I'm trying to do that in the crap-ass space we have now.
So, no, what he's talking about is there's an outlet in every possible place. When people bring in their own devices,
Right.
it's up to them to bring in their own chargers. They do
Okay.
have ones that can be signed out within the library,
Right.
but pretty much students
Because
are.
I was looking at the
Yeah.
ones that are in the hub that have those little things.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
one simple thing we can do while we exist in a space that's basically exam rooms.
And we're actually looking at those, and I don't know if that's what Harrisburg has, the independent, because,
In fact, that's where we saw the advertisement for it. It was, the Quick Boost is the name of the company that makes them.
Okay?
it's the same, it's the things that you see in airports, so that where you can just go in and things. And what,
That's
and
the
why,
single thing that the students appreciate the most. I've gotten more compliments over
Yeah.
that little silly
Yeah.
thing than anything else.
I want to put in 2 of those while I can, just
Right.
because, and again, that's probably the big, that's a sort of like, and I just really, I'm gonna get you guys names. So, but again, that would be really helpful.
Yeah. And we're looking at that now because what we've had is that we would purchase generic recharging units or devices for Macs and for Dells, which is what's common, and things like that. And we're just finding that they change so frequently and they're not very durable. And once you sit down with them and you pull them, you can actually damage them. And then also the new Macs are not allowing generic devices to be used. So now, instead of being able to have those at the desk that we used to, we're just going to go and just pitch them because they're not very useful. But we're looking at either those independent stand stations, like you see at the airport, or putting things on tabletops that you can actually sit at a tabletop and
The
wear
Quick
it.
Boost they have the back of all the connectors are USB, so if the technology ever changes down the line, you need different adapters. It's a matter of just pulling it out and putting another one in.
Okay.
So it has that ability, and I think it's a 1-year even guarantee, even for vandalism, that they'll cover the first year for,
Can I talk to you afterwards?
So Joe, the use studies that you're going to go into the group
Mhm.
study rooms for the use?
So one of the key thing that we did when we designed the Knowledge Commons was we added areas where students can reserve to work in small groups, thinking that a lot of the small group activity will take place in these rooms. And anybody in education knows, I mean, collaboration. So everything is much different than libraries 20 years ago when everything was quiet, steady space, and we had carols that kind of kept you down into a little bit. Well, and one of the challenges we face is that we still have people who love them. What is the reading room on the second floor, which is students refer to as the Harry Potter room, is a very popular space because of the fact that they patrol it, they keep it quiet, but it's not computers are up there. You go up there to kind of work at a large desk, large surface, but you see everything. There's always a lot of activity. And being able to see what's going on is probably one of the key things with the design of the Knowledge Commons and any design, is that the glass walls, the glass rooms, just the visibility of everything lends to a certain amount of excitement. And what we see students doing, and interesting, and it kind of ties in with what Daniel Pink was saying this morning about how people learn and being creative, is there's a lot of assignments in which students are given assignments where they have a specific project that they have to complete. So they're doing a PowerPoint presentation or they're studying for exam. But what's interesting is that you also have the space being used for informal group. You get together with people to just reserve the room to sit and talk about, I don't know. I mean, this group was sitting, and they were a group of psychology majors who created their own writing group because they were all working on their thesis, and they were all supporting. They didn't necessarily always share it, but they used the room because they could reserve it every week for a certain amount of time throughout the semester, and they could come in, and they knew that that space was available. And the group study rooms are very, very popular. In fact, one of the lessons we're learning is we didn't put enough in. I think,
You reserve them online too?
you can reserve them online. Most frequently, you come to the desk and you reserve it. Okay.
Which is another space ask questions. So there's a couple of figures, who are resources there, and that Joe oversees and kind of really is able to mentor.
Right.
So last year, throwing out numbers, so we get close to 10,000 reservations last year. But what is most significant about the group study rooms is the next set of numbers. So toward the end of the semester, I kept saying we seem to be turning down a lot of groups that are looking for a room. So right around Thanksgiving, I had my staff start tracking how many times they turned a group down. Okay? And just from that 5-week period, we turned down over 600 groups. And if you think that every group has to have at least 2 people in it, we're turning away 1,200 students from the Knowledge Commons. Okay. And this semester we've been tracking it, and it averages out about 50 a week, 50 groups we can accommodate a week.
Have you thought about networking with other, like the Knowledge Commons in education, and sort of acting as a referral service?
We refer them there, we refer them to the Learning Center, we refer them to Career Services. In fact, we've had meetings with Career Services to understand how we could best do it.
Right.
What hurts a space is restrictions on food and innovation, is what the pushback there is. Career Services blocks off, they have 40 group study rooms. They block those off if there's any type of special thing going on campus. So when it's career fair, and they have to be used. So that kind of consistency. Since we don't ever block off that space, you have more.
You're the fallback.
We're the fallback. So if you can't get over to Career Services for that Skype interview, and you're doing that on your laptop, and your apartment is too loud, and you can't, you don't want to risk being in the coffee shop, you can come and reserve a space, because we will accept a person being virtual. So the two restriction is one could be virtual. And the key thing that I keep emphasizing to staff, and I need to go back and emphasize instead of the how, the why, is flexibility, okay? And just not go into this with a lot of expectations or rules or regulations, but just kind of be able to go with the flow and see how students use the space, So,
Because I wonder, as we go to more of these spaces, and I think it sort of is in line with what the university, God willing, wants to do, is to have more collaboration between the different sites, so that, I know there's spaces in the College of Science, I know there's spaces in the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences, and I'm never quite sure who knows what is where.
right.
And I think that's one of our struggles.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, this is our space, this is for physics students, which is fine, but again, it's sort of like, if there's a demand, we should start working together.
And we need to somehow formalize that, because right now I meet with Mike Rook from Innovation Studio. Right. So Mike and I get together frequently. Scott McDonald oftentimes is part of that. I meet with Neil Johnson at the Learning Center to kind of find a way. I meet with the people who are working over in Pollock. Okay, because I've had I go over periodically to Career Services and talk to them. So I'm going out and kind of seeing how we make those connections with these learning spaces, these informal learning spaces on campus, so that we're not duplicating things, but that we're also sharing. Learning centers at times, they don't have the private rooms, but they have these kind of cubicles that can be reserved, and they oftentimes are empty. So I got people 50 a week that I'm turning away. I want to know, where are some other places that they can be going to. So.
What we need is a centralized scheduling.
Right.
It's usually going to happen.
Yeah. We are using EMS for this, even though if you go over to the Innovation Studio, they went with a steel case scheduling system that doesn't talk with EMS. We went with EMS with the idea that we really do hope at some point to have this centralized.
I know that there's the whole thing with the space reservation space, but are they still thinking about what the students do? So, sorry.
Okay. So I thought that I was going to have some of my colleagues here from the campuses, but I don't see of them. So I'm not going to go in. I originally was going to talk a little bit more about the library services and the changes it is. One of the other things that we did, so we opened up a space, made it more student-friendly, and we also brought together different services that we thought students would benefit from. And in that space, we have actually 6 different service points. So it can be a little bit confusing, but in addition to having library staff who can help you with the room reservations, but can also help you with finding research materials, we have the multimedia specialists who can work with video and podcasts. We have the tech tutors that help with software. So if you need to understand how to make pivot tables in Excel, they're available to work with you on this. The IT desk consultants handles anything you own. So as we see that wireless use get higher, the demand on their having somebody in the building who is just dedicated to the things you personally own has been very beneficial. And then we have writing tutors who I've yet met because they start at 10 and they stay till 1. So I tend to try to get some sleep. And then the lab consultants who work with the hardware, they're the group that rotates between us, Pollock, and the other places.
And that's coming on board, I think it's this fall, there's going to be 2 buildings in Pollock that are going to be devoted to science and engineering and STEM students. And so they're looking at those spaces there, which is another place where at least starting a conversation could be really helpful.
Yeah, and I would love to plant, when Pollock was looking at the renovations, I talked to Lori about, can I plant a library staff person there? Can I outreach somehow? Is there a need? And we're really looking and seeing, well, what are the type of things that come up, And I do find, talking a little bit about these, I'm going to hit is that most of the questions that we get at the library desk has to do with those room reservations. We categorize questions in 4 different ways, and we put anything dealing with the rooms under policy, okay? And we still get a lot of directional questions. But it's very misleading. One of the things that I started looking at is that 10% of reference, which is very traditional library questions, is actually more than any other place in the library. First floor, greater visibility, higher number of traffic, we're going to get the most questions, okay? And what's interesting is that we also do an online chat service. So we answer questions that students send in through the chat, and we answer most of those as well. But the reason for that, even though there's 32 participating libraries within Penn State doing this, and we're the big area over here, big pie over here, is that my staff is responsible for it on weekends and late at night. Okay? And if you have a question and you're working on something and you want to chat with a librarian as to how do I cite this, you may be doing that at 10 as opposed to 8 in the morning. We got excellent coverage from 8 to 4, but we don't have that many questions coming in from 8 to 4. We have questions coming in on weekends and late at night. And that's when I have the people overseeing it, and that's when we get the most questions.
So students are actual, so you have flex time for your staff, or how is that?
They rotate. We've been experimenting with different staffing model, and I have a mix of, most of it is wage employees, but most of them are student workers. But they're either graduate students, students who are familiar with how libraries work and how to search the catalog and how to search databases and things like that. And then we have a lot of part-time people who've just been doing it for years. And they rotate through that. I have them rotating through that desk in the Knowledge Commons and other reference desks in the libraries. And that was something new for them. They used to always work in kind of silos. So you would have people only work this desk and they never worked anywhere else. It's the same skills, it's the same questions. It's just a lot more. So I want to jump to this because I want to show you what impact the greater visibility and openness that this has had. And what I did is I was looking back at previous years, but I concentrated on what happened last semester, compared it with what happened in fall 2010. And I chose fall 2010 because right at the, in 2011 is when the library started its construction to complete the Knowledge Commons. So all the numbers dropped, everything dropped. So I could really blow the numbers up if I used 2011 because we weren't seeing that many students because we had most of it closed. So, but we saw, you know, the number of people who are coming to the desk, not virtual, but actually coming to my desk, has jumped a lot from what the desk used to be like before this project. And you're seeing that also with the IT service desk. Having that central location for help to provide help with your personal devices. When they were in Willard, nobody knew where to find them. Or you had it, Willard is this very complex maze, okay? So they always teased me that you always, if you went to the help desk, you dropped crumbs so that you can find your way back out. But it's complex, it's difficult. And when they came to us and we gave them a big space, it added to the number of people. Willard deals with the phone service now. Okay, so if you call ITS help, you get somebody in Willard. If you want to bring in your personal device, and last week, I had somebody coming in with a grocery cart with an old PC that they wanted them to work on, and they did. They had it for several days. I don't know what they were doing, but she came in with this cart, and I was like, oh my God. But they take care of alum, they take care of faculty, staff, and students. Okay, so. And then the big whopping change has been Media Commons. Okay, so the One Button Studio, if you haven't seen the Media Commons and Knowledge Commons, they used to be on the second floor right above us. They didn't have a nice space. They didn't have nice rooms. If you ever have seen it, it wasn't very attractive. They didn't have the One Button Studio, okay? And boom, you bring in all this new technology, and it just transforms everything, okay? It is a... So it's probably the thing that I think creates the biggest buzz, okay? So last fall, we don't have a way now to track individuals, but just the number of people that each come in. So somebody who comes to me need help with a citation, and then goes to the writing tutor to how do you put that in paper, and then goes to the tech tutor to get that into a PowerPoint, and goes to, you know, they could be counted 6 times, okay, just so that, but when I count up the total number of people that went to each of our desks, physically showed up in the Knowledge Commons last semester, it was over 22,000 people. I mean, so we're doing good. No, they haven't. We haven't done that. I know there have been libraries that do a swipe card system. The other IT desks ask for your Access ID, and they do enter that into a database. We have never done that, and there's a mentality that you don't take personal information from students. But we do for room reservations, so I don't, you know, and if somebody would aggregate that information, it really doesn't, it keeps the privacy there. Oh, okay. So I wanted to jump ahead. I had indicated that I wasn't for sure if the Knowledge Commons created a ripple effect or a splash or an explosion. I think it's more of an explosion for libraries because it has affected everything we do. Our gate count has gone up. Okay, so last semester we had over 1 million people walking through the library. We do something called a head count, in which every hour we go through and count how many people are in the building. And last September we had 40,000 higher than the September before. Okay, we're seeing some increase in books being used, so there's a slight increase. But this goes back to we have laptops, but the laptops are not being used as heavily. Okay. We get incredible press. So we have a lot of people visiting us from other institutions, and we get wonderful comments from students. And it's this opportunity it's no longer the library seen as this kind of isolated entity, but working with other groups across campus, that is really exciting. And thank you so much for attending.
See Joe, and for the grad students, he has an assistantship that you can come in and study the Knowledge Commons next year, so consider applying for it.
Yep, it's out there. Thank you.